Vice Chairman of the Institute for Paradigmatic Reforms. Matthew Boyce, Senior Fellow at the Hudson Institute in the United States. Nina Sajic, Chair of the Institute of Political Science at the University of Banja Luka in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And last but not least, our moderator for this session, Agnes Vos, Research Director at the Hungarian Institute of International Affairs. Please welcome our guests.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for staying with us and honoring this panel discussion with your presence. I am Agnes Vos, Director for Research at the Hungarian Institute of International Affairs, and I will be the moderator of this panel discussion. This also means that over the course of the next hour, our panelists and I will explore the changing regional roles of Central Europe, the Western Balkans, Eastern Europe, and the Caucasus, and examine how the countries of these regions are positioning themselves in response to the shifting global order. We will also consider, of course, the challenges and opportunities that arise from the ongoing transformation of the geopolitical landscape. And before I ask my first question, I would like to put into a framework the topic of this panel discussion, like why did we put these three regions into one panel discussion, and why is it important to talk about how these regions are influencing and shaping the new world order and vice versa. And even though I have like 1,001 reasons offering an answer to these questions, I would highlight only two main reasons for that. The first one, what we already discussed over the panels before us, that we have this new world order where we can witness a certain level of erosion of the rules-based international order, and as a result, alternative centers of power have begun to take shape, and genuine multilateralism is increasingly being replaced by a multipolar and, as in the previous sessions and in the first panel discussion was mentioned, multinodal system, and we can also witness the rise of minilateralism, transactionalism, and inter-regional cooperations that are formed among smaller groups of states with shared interests and values. The other reason why we are discussing these three regions in one panel discussion is that the Western Balkans, the Central and Eastern Europe, and the Caucasus are increasingly becoming strategic focal points in this rapidly transforming global order. And these regions are positioned at the intersections of commerce, culture, and other important geopolitical dynamics. And these regions have become arenas of intensifying competition among global and regional actors, and these kinds of competition are reshaping their political and economic realities. So, and I have wonderful panelists together with me today who bring a wealth of experience and knowledge to these topics and to this discussion. And I believe that I have spoken enough for now, and I promise that from now on I will just asking my questions. And let's start with a general question. This is for all of you. And I would like to know your view. How do you see these countries of Central and Eastern Europe, the Caucasus and the Western Balkans? Are they playing or acting as an agency, or they are choosing between competing imperial projects, old or new? Matthew, would you like to start answering this first round of questions?
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. So, I mean, and what an honor to be on this distinguished panel. So, I mean, from an American perspective, actually, the short answer is, of course, because, I mean, I think there's no country represented on this panel is not acting as their own independent country. Every country here is actually, you could argue, maybe even bucking some of the interests of some of the major powers in the region. Looking at Azerbaijan has an independent foreign policy different from that of Russia, which has dominated the country for so many years. Look at North Macedonia. North Macedonia is in its attempt to efforts to join the European Union. It's making an issue out of the language issue and the whole Bulgarian minority issue, or I haven't gotten that wrong. So is defending its interests. So the same is true with Bosnia-Herzegovina, and the same is true with Slovakia. They're not doing what they're being told to do. So in my estimation, that actually exercises agency, but I would actually maybe like to take issue perhaps with the way the question is phrased a little bit, because it's sort of you're suggesting there's sort of two imperial projects, and of course, as you can probably anticipate what I'm going to say here as an American, that I don't really buy into this idea that somehow or other the United States is an empire, because we happen to be maybe in this sort of sitting sort of in the center of a certain order that's based on political principles and based on how societies are organized, but to call it an empire or an imperial project is a bit of a stretch. In fact, I would argue a flawed assumption. I know it's something that one hears from time to time, but I think it's a very simplistic way of looking at a very complex sort of a situation. The other empire, I guess, imperial project that I think you're referring to, I imagine you're referring to probably is the Russian imperial project, which actually I think does meet the definition of a multinational empire, and in fact we are seeing it actually expanding its sort of its own rationale, its own behavior these days is actually is seeking to incorporate other countries into its space, its political construct, and so I would actually argue that actually is much closer to much closer to the definition of an empire than the United States, which is the center of a very, very loose set of countries. If we were really an imperial project, the world would look very, very different, because so many of our friends, allies, and partners are, they regularly don't do what we, what sort of one administration or another might wish for them to do, and so I sort of think I would kind of caution a little bit of, or a little bit of a caution on tossing these phrases around, because I think they don't do justice to complex realities, and they relativize different sort of political and economic spaces in ways that I think are not that helpful. But maybe I'll just stop there for now.
Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Well, I will start by saying that there is no strategic competition among the great powers on the Balkans since 1989. The situation was quite different before 1989, because former Yugoslavia was a buffer state, exactly on the borderline between the East and the West. For us, former Yugoslavs, the Iron Frontier was on our eastern and northern border. We were on the other side of the Iron Frontier. Even though there was a perpetual question whether the Brezhnev Doctrine applies to Yugoslavia or does not. And in some of my researches, I found some interesting documents, right now funny documents. For example, there are two major towns on our southern border, in Strumica and in Bitola, and the local communist leaderships in 1980, after Tito died, discuss how to organize the resistance if Soviets decide to invade and applied the Brezhnev Doctrine to former Yugoslavia. But everything changed in 1989. After the end of the Cold War, the borders of the West expanded. The countries of former Yugoslavia were actually swallowed by the West, but they're still not digested, if I may use the metaphor here. It's not because we don't want to be digested, but there are some digestion issues with the European Union, obviously, nowadays. In terms of security also, we can talk that ever since 1995, and the two crucial international agreements which were reached in 1995, meaning the Dayton Agreement and also the interim accord between Macedonia and Greece at that time, there is a heavy US presence on the Balkans. So we're inside the American security umbrella. So there is no competition or rivalry among great powers on the territory of the Western Balkans. In terms of economy, things are even more straightforward. This morning, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Macedonian Minister of Foreign Affairs, Tim Chmutsunski, when he talked about my country, he said that around 70% of our trade exchange is with the single market. If we include the countries of the region, of the Western Balkans, the numbers go above 80%. And this is not something which was developed in the last 20 or 30 years. The situation has been there for at least like a century. We have statistics going back to the Kingdom of Yugoslavia before the Second World War, and even at that time, Germany and the countries which are part of the single market nowadays were the top trading partners of former Yugoslavia. So also about the EU integration, even though under Tito's time we were part of this so-called non-aligned movement, EU integration became prominent in the countries of former Yugoslavia in the late 1980s. After the promulgation of the Single European Act in 1986, former Yugoslavia started preparing to join the single market and the European Economic Community of that time. It's a small historical fact, but our last communist parliament, exclusively made up of a single party, in 1989 promulgated a resolution to the governments of Republic of Macedonia and the Socialist Federative Republic of Yugoslavia, saying that they should adapt the Macedonian and the Yugoslav legislation to the European one until the end of 1992. So we were thinking at that time about this problem. But the problem was, once the war started, we were kind of contained. It was obvious that there will be no spillover of our wars within the wider region, and forgotten. There was a glimmer of hope after 2003 and the Thessaloniki Declaration of the European Union, but also the Thessaloniki Declaration was forgotten after the French and the Dutch referendum of 2005, when we had meetings with our European partners telling us that Croatia will be the last country to get in, and then there will be a very, very, very long break. So nowadays we're still within this very, 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 very long break, but it's a problem because defending our sovereignty right now does not mean exclusion, it means inclusion in our case. We're not actually, we don't have the benefits of the single market, even though we cooperate with the single market. We're not part of the Schengen zone, and we're not participating in the European project. So just short, I'm ending. What is to be done? I think the approach of the Hungarian government is the right one. I was here as a special representative during the Hungarian presidency. Hungary wants the Western Balkans to be fully integrated within the European Union as soon as possible. And I think Europe was very creative when Europe was confronted with issues. It's not creative when it comes to the Western Balkans, unfortunately, but we need to think about at least full integration of the region, even without membership immediately, because we don't want to have another implosion of the whole region or for certain segments of the region. So this will be my initial remarks. Thank you.
We will come back to this question. We are in this lucky situation that we have two representatives from the Western Balkan region. Nina, may I ask you to share your thoughts on this question too, from the perspective of Bosnia and Herzegovina?
I will try to go back to what you said, what these three regions have in common. And that relates maybe to this emerging new world order that we are seeing. And we, as professors of international relations, I often tell my students that they are blessed and cursed at the same time to study international relations. Blessed because they literally have a laboratory before their eyes, and cursed because we still don't know how and where this new world order is going to look like. So going back to what these three regions have in common, well, they are no longer waiting to be integrated into this new world emerging order. They have their own trajectories, they have their own decisions. I'm not an expert on Caucasus, but what we are witnessing in Caucasus, besides this persistent security challenge, is also a fluid alliances or alliance formation, which was not the case in the past several decades. So these alliances are now being based, we've seen it with Armenia, we've seen it with Georgia, they're being based on interests, on energy, on security. So alliances are no longer absolute. I cannot speak for the Central Europe, but we are in Budapest, so we know what is going on. Within the Central Europe, these countries like Hungary, Poland, to a certain extent, and Slovakia are actually framing the European Union within. They are trying to have their own position in the EU on their own terms. And this is not anti-European policy, it's what they called post-naivety. In the case of the Western Balkans, the region that Ivica and myself come from, yes, all these countries from all these regions, yes, they do exercise agencies. They are political agents in the world scene, and it's not the case whether they are choosing from one imperial power to another. That would be an oversimplification of the international system. And maybe there is a general, and it also relates a lot to like what was Matthew saying about the way the question is framed. It's a question framed from the global center point of view, but these countries are shaping, they're choosing their own destinies in a way. So they are not choosing between one imperial project over another. They are more or less navigating, if you like, through a very constrained environment. So if you, for example, take an example of Serbia, for example, Serbia has decided to have a military neutrality. This doesn't mean that Serbia doesn't have a political agency in the military respect. Yes, it does, but it has chosen this strategic position so that it enables Serbia to, at the same time, have a partnership both with NATO and Russia at the same time. At some point in Serbia, you had military exercises that were taking place both with the NATO and Russia before Ukraine happened, sometimes even in the same year. As for Bosnia and Herzegovina situation, people always say that Bosnia and Herzegovina is a rather complex country. The way it is structured, you know, there are around 40% of the world population live in this kind of complex country, being it federal design. often you hear accusation, you even have sub-state units like the region that I come from, Republic of Srpska, who is trying to exercise its political agency in the international relations. You can always, often you hear that the Republic of Srpska is the one who is blocking the whatever reforms in Bosnia and Herzegovina. No, Republic of Srpska is simply choosing international partners who are recognizing its specific position within Bosnia and Herzegovina in the same way Quebec does in Canada. So all these countries, they do, and regions, they do have political agencies, and they are exercising their political agency in the international system.
Just very briefly, from the perspective of the Caucasus and the Central Europe, what would you, how would you answer this question? Rusif.
Thank you, Agnes, for this interesting question. I would definitely agree with my colleagues, with Mr. Ambassador Matthew Ivica, about how the countries which represent our regions have agency, enjoy to some extent leverage, and of course also face immense pressure from different geopolitical poles. These regions are mostly consisting of countries which I can refer to as bridge states, because they definitely bridge not only different geopolitical civilizations, but also different mentalities. And in this case, even some countries such as Hungary and Slovakia, which have some alignments, they can also become very flexible in their foreign policy priorities. As for the South Caucasus, for us, for our region, since the independence from the Soviet Union in 1991, it was mostly based on geopolitical dichotomy, West versus Russia, and many foreign policy choices usually were based on this dilemma. This is why Armenia has chosen the pro-Russian camp. Georgia, for almost 2 decades, was on the pro-European path. For Azerbaijan, it opted out for a unique position in this case. It decided to go with balancing, or with what I usually call equidistance, an equal distance from either confronting party. Nevertheless, these countries, even in South Caucasus, nowadays, if you observe how the regional developments are happening, you can see that even Armenia and Georgia, which used to have strong alignments, either with the Russian-led Eurasian structures or with the transatlantic organizations, they are also now trying to somehow change this paradigm and switch to multivectoral foreign policies. And we already have some role models for this. It's Azerbaijan, it's Kazakhstan, it's Serbia, for instance. Hungary and Slovakia are going this way. Therefore, I think in the changing global and regional order, being flexible, especially if you are located within the bridge regions, would be too important. Thank you.
Last but not least, from the perspective of Central European countries.
Hello, and first, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm the advisor to our Prime Minister, Mr. Robert Fico, in the area of strengthening national sovereignty. So actually, this is a question we have been in Slovakia asking ourselves a lot. What is our position in the emerging world order? What should we do, if we can do anything at all? And I think it is clear also from the feedback from my colleagues that definitely we are doing something. We are exercising our sovereignty. But the important question is, in what way are we exercising it? And we are trying to strike a fine balance between being too submissive and too dominant. So we assert our interests in a very constructive way, in a very partner-like way. So we are open to compromise, we are open to dialogue, but on the other hand, we want to make it clear, also in the European Union, but in other relationships that there are some questions for us which are very, very important, and we will stand by them. So yes, we are exercising our sovereignty, and whether we are choosing between two competing imperial projects, I don't think any one or two imperial projects are relevant for the 21st century. We are seeing an increasingly multipolar world. And actually, we as Slovaks feel quite good in this, because if you look at our history, we have had historically experience with both the West and the East. We have been part of both blocs at certain points in our history, although mostly we have been part of the West, but also here we have had experience with Eastern Christianity for a few decades in the 19th century. Obviously, we were part of the Eastern Bloc during the Cold War, which was not an entirely negative experience. It has had its good sides as well. And we are obviously a Slavic country, so we can understand the Russians much better than Americans will ever be able to. And we are also able to understand Americans in a much better way the Russians will ever be able to. So we have this kind of historical background, cultural background, but also if you look at the popular opinion, across decades, overwhelmingly, the biggest part of Slovak population wants to be somewhere in the middle between the West and the East, which does not at all negate that we are part of the EU and part of the NATO. I think that's a very good thing. There's no discussion that we should change this at the moment. But that doesn't mean we have to agree with everything that is said in these organizations. So we are searching for a way how to state our opinions, how to keep our policy in line with generally what the public wants, but I think also what is relevant for the emerging world order, because in a world with many blocs, there will be many countries in between to various degrees in various nets of relationships, and countries which can understand more blocs and have good relationships with several blocs, which is, I'm sure it's also the role of Slovakia. I think this will be an asset because we have insight into several ways of thinking and we can find connections, and this can prove very valuably if we are aware of our position, aware of our capabilities. And of course, we also have to be realistic, so we are not a big state, but we are trying to leverage our position in the best way we can to protect the interests of the Slovak public, but also to be a constructive partner.
Thank you very much. And in the next round of questions, let's explore a little bit how these countries are navigating in this new world order. And I think when we are talking about this navigation, we are also talking about the recalibration of foreign policies. And let's combine these questions, and let's focus on one of the most important actors in this region that is important for all of the countries representing these regions, and this is the European Union, because we have countries that would like to be part of this kind of integration format that the European Union is representing, while we have countries that who wants to have like a strategically well-based relationship with the Union. And let's start with the Western Balkans, because we have two representatives here, and the integration of this region is also important for Hungary. And for example, during the Hungarian EU presidency, the government made considerable efforts to accelerate the integration process of the Western Balkans, and this is also a place where we can mention that, for example, the accession of Romania and Bulgaria to the Schengen area was a kind of success also for the Hungarian government, because there was a long road that led to the accession of these countries to this system. When you take into consideration these factors, and if I am not mistaken, this year is the 20th anniversary of for North Macedonia for like waiting for the European Union membership. So how have the Western Balkan states recalibrated their foreign policies, taking into consideration all these kind of characteristics and the role of the European Union nowadays in this region?
Okay. Well, you mentioned Hungary, so I'll just, Hungary has an important role to play in the Balkans. They call it Western Balkans. We hate the term because, but it has been imposed on us, so we use it anyways. It has an important role, and it has, let's say, more to bring to the table because it's closer to the region. It knows the mentality of the region, and it doesn't come with a lot of baggage, like, for example, Germany or some Austria, or even though you were part of the same empire. And Hungary is really trying to play objective role in the country, lots of projects, and it's one of the few within the European Union that is still advocating inclusion of the Western Balkans. Just briefly, what is going on with this new world order is the fact that this, at least for the Western Balkans, is the fact that this clear trajectory, like westernization, liberalization, EU integration, and for some countries, or for most countries, NATO integration, is being contested. Not saying rejected, but it's no longer taken for granted within the European Union. One fact is still certain, is that if there is one thing that the countries of the Western Balkan agree upon, or that they can find consensus on, is their future in the European Union. And all the countries of the Western Balkans are still very much committed to the EU integration. However, that process itself is contested, simply because there has been this, you know, and when we talk about European integration of the Western Balkans, Ivica and myself, Ivica probably more than I, and Matthew as well, we've been to so many conferences on the Western Balkans in the EU integration. I have supervised so many master theses of the European integration of the Western Balkans that you really don't know if there is nothing new that we can say, or that there is nothing new that we could bring to this panel today. The Western Balkan countries have warned the Brussels that this gap that they are creating with not including the Western Balkan is leaving a space for actors such as Turkey, China, Gulf states, Iran, and to a certain degree Russia, that they've literally walked into the Western Balkans. We warned them for many, many years. All of a sudden, Brussels is shocked that there is such a strong presence of these countries. The good thing with the new world order, regardless of how uncertain it might be, is that it is creating an opportunity. I'm not saying that it's going to be safer than the previous world order, but it's creating a space for us in the Western Balkans to breathe. Literally to breathe, to maybe rediscover new ways, new strategies, new partnerships. And the countries, like you mentioned, this morning we heard Minister Siarto saying that this new global order is also going to bring a revolution in global discourse. So when we say peace, we mean peace. When we say partnership, we mean partnership. So when we say and when we hear in the Brussels yes, we do want Western Balkan to be part of our club, then we mean it. We don't close the door and come up with conditionalities such as name change. We don't come up with different kind of obstructions. We don't go to Bosnia and Herzegovina and say, yes, you need to get rid of colonialism, you need to get rid of the colonial imperial structure that has been there for 30 years. And then you come up with 5+2 or whatever criteria and conditions that nobody can fulfill, that even the countries of the European Union, some of the European countries cannot fulfill. So the New World Order with European Union rude awakening, because Europe is still not awakened, might bring a chance for the countries of the Western Balkans to finally breathe. And just briefly, since we are talking about, Ivica mentioned in his first intervention about whether big powers do compete in the Balkans or not. They are not competing in the way that they are competing in other regions, Middle East or somewhere else. Each of these powers have their own, let's say, portfolio, if you like. So United States is more concerned with security issues, China with infrastructure projects and economy, and Russian presence is diminishing, if you like. Russia is more connected to the region with historical ties rather than having a real influence.
I would like to add to what Nina said. I think that the Western Balkan Europe integration is long overdue, meaning my country should have joined at least at the same time when Croatia joined, if not way before, because let's remember in 1991, the Budapest Commission, when Yugoslavia was collapsing, said that only Slovenia and Macedonia fulfilled the criteria to be internationally recognized. Well, it did not happen because of political decisions. Also, all of the other countries of the Western Balkans should have been in the Union, immediately after Croatia. The Europe integration process is not something too sophisticated or too complex for the Balkan states. We've been in the process for at least 2 decades, all of us. We know everything about the processes. We adopt our legislation. We have to, because we want to attract foreign direct investment, which is usually Western European, primarily German and the like. Those companies want to operate within the same legislative, regulatory, judicial system as back home. So Europe integration is offering us a way to do that. So we are adapting, and the only problem is there is no political decision of the European Union to actually let us in. And this is the real problem. Right now there is a club of countries supporting the European integration. Hungary is leading the club, followed by Slovakia, Austria, Italy, Slovenia and Croatia, and this is about it. So there is a big problem here. Also, the problem got exacerbated after the decision to grant a candidate status to Ukraine. And yes, we all have sympathy, we all have sympathies, like we really support Ukraine in its effort to actually resist the aggression, but the fact that Ukraine became a candidate before Bosnia, it's a major injustice, not only to Bosnia, but to the whole Western Balkans. Right now, whenever I attend a conference somewhere in Western Europe, and when they talk about Ukrainian Europe integration, they talk that this is a geopolitical project. Whereas when they talk about the Western Balkans, they say it should be a merit-based process. Why is this the case? Because there is a war going on in Ukraine. Well, there were wars going on in the Balkans in the 1990s. So just imagine when we hear that, the war in Ukraine is the first conflict, military conflict on the European soil after the Second World War. Imagine how does it sound on the Balkans? I mean, have we forgotten about the Balkan wars? They happened only 2 decades ago. And also, when talk about geopolitics, let's remember the great migrant crisis of 2015. Our countries were invited for the first time to be present at the European Council during the great migrant crisis. Why? Because we were needed for security reasons. Schengen border at that time, resisting this migrant flow, was not in the blue border, in the sea between Greece and Turkey. It was on the Macedonian-Greek border. The first police trying to stem the migrant flow was the Macedonian police on the Macedonian-Greek border. And we were needed at that time, so we were invited. Well, after, the great migration flow stopped, again, we were forgotten. So what I'm saying, what I'm trying to say, yes, of course, all of our countries support fully the European integration of Ukraine, but again, Europe should actually initially fulfill its prior obligation, meaning Balkan European integration should be finished, we should be absorbed and fully integrated, and then we should focus on Ukraine. I will give you another example. I already gave it, a couple of months ago here in Budapest. In October, Ukraine will get the pan-European roaming. So all cell phone calls, mobile phones from Ukraine to Europe will be local. Well, guess what? Since 2008, Western Balkan countries, our ministers of telecommunications signed a joint letter. Kosovo is there and Serbia is there. Both ministers have signed, even Croatia, not member at that time, part of the Western Balkans, asking for this pan-European mobile network to be extended over the Western Balkans. What's happening? Since 2008, it means 17 years, European Commission is analyzing the proposal. Well, the analysis was much swifter, for Ukraine, even though it's double the size in population and in territory than the whole of the Western Balkans united. So this is my point, it leads to cynicism on the Balkans. Our citizens, of course, they support the European integration of our countries, but they don't bother anymore. Some people are asking me about the young people. Yes, when I was young, when I was a teenager, the European integration was something, interesting. But for nowadays, for the youth of my country, my daughter is 19. She grew up thinking, that the European integration is just around the corner. They don't bother again. These kids, their radicalism is quite different. So this is why I'm saying the Balkan European integration should be finished first, and then we can focus on Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, and all the other issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And let's move very fast to the Central European region and then to the east. So Central Europe, or within Central European region, we have this V4 cooperation that was established after the regime change and aimed, among other things, to support the EU integration of these participating countries. And now they are all members of the European Union for more than 20 years. And in recent times, we can see that some of the countries are challenging the European Union. So as an EU member, how these countries are recalibrating their foreign policies in this new world order. Dalibor, we are running out of time, so I would ask you to briefly answer this question, because then we still have to give the opportunity for the other two speakers. Thank you very much, and sorry for that.
The relationship of Slovakia to the European Union is a case example of a small country seeking their sovereign stance. In the beginning, before our accession to the EU, it was a clear thing. Basically, every political party was for the accession. It had overwhelming public support, and the Slovak public associated European Union with prosperity, security, and a well-functioning state. A lot of things in this way happened, so some things have improved, and we are grateful for that. But after more than 20 years, we are realizing that there is a package that comes with it. So we are facing certain pressures to conform to values which are not always in line with what is our tradition, which is not always in line what the majority of the public wants. So we are searching for a balance. We are trying to be constructive partners as much as possible, but on the other hand, saying that there are some topics which are very important for us. And I may give you a short example. We have recently vetoed a document by the Council of Ministers of the European Union on democratic resilience. The veto was together with Hungary, so 2 states vetoed it. But before we did this, there were several rounds of consultations where we stated, okay, we can accept maybe this, but this we want to change. These are very important things for us. Please, can you put in these information, for example, that we want to emphasize that if we fight against hybrid threats, this cannot be misused to suppress dissenting opinions, and many points we wanted to put in there, and it was basically ignored. So in the end, we vetoed it. But it was not before prior consultations, and we do not use the veto every time. We just use it in a way that we want to make ourselves heard, and I think it's being heard by our partners. So we have a good relationship with the European Union, I think, despite what maybe some politicians who are in the European Union but not speaking for the European Union at the moment have a bit different narratives. But I think it's a good cooperation, and we are finding our way as equal partners in the way that we can. So this is, in short, our stance. And generally still, the European has public support, so we are trying to change the things from within as good as we can, being constructive partners, but being also sovereign and standing up for our interests.
Thank you, Dalibor. Let's move to the east a little bit. And also, Matthew, I would like to ask you to answer this question like shortly, because we are running out of time. But I would like to ask you this question when it comes to Eastern Europe. So Eastern Europe appeared in the forefront of the EU accession and neighborhood policy of the European Union. But keeping that in mind, like NATO accession to Ukraine, however, it is not on the table for now. And how is the EU enlargement without North Atlantic enlargement affect regional power relations in Eastern Europe? What do you think?
That's for me. I think that the whole question, I mean, you rightfully said that the NATO membership is off the table. I think it's been a bit of a red herring, actually, for quite some time. I mean, it's been an issue, but it's always been sort of the Russian narrative that this is a sort of immediate, or this is kind of like going to happen is absurd. I mean, ever since the Bucharest summit in 2008, when it became quite clear that Germany and to a lesser extent France were opposed to it, it has not really been as much of a live issue as it's being reported. But here now, but that's sort of just in terms of context. I think what the EU accession aspect of it, I mean, sort of, if you look at Ukraine as a European country, it's wanted to be part of Europe now for many years, and it's been quite clear in that respect. And the fact that the EU is actually now accelerating the process to try to bring Ukraine in is a major step, because of course that is an enormous commitment that the EU is making to Ukraine. And it also, of course, will involve all sorts of compromises from other EU member states to enable that. It's going to be a complicated process, but it's not going to have the same degree of security guarantees as NATO would. So NATO membership would. So it's another step in terms of anchoring Ukraine in the West, quote unquote, in Europe, which is where it wants to be. It doesn't want to be part of the Eurasian space, a la Alexander Dugin, or a la Sergei Karaganov, or a la Dmitry Medvedev. It wants to be part of Europe, and the fact that EU is doing that is actually is amazing, because it would help anchor the Ukraine in Europe, but it wouldn't have that security dimension, and so that actually is sort of a bit of the rub, right? Because Russia has made it very clear that Ukraine doesn't have the right to exist as a sovereign state, and that it's really part of Russia, and so without that security guarantee, it's easily imaginable that the Kremlin will continue to try to destabilize the country without that kind of security guarantee. Now, that's of course it needs for NATO to consider Ukraine as a member. It would have to it requires 32, and of course that consensus is not there. So it's not happening right now. But the EU dimension is a way to kind of bring Ukraine into Europe in a way that offers some anchor, but doesn't do the security part, and that's going to be the constant issue over into the future, because it's hard to imagine that, given the maximalist rhetoric that you see coming out of the Kremlin, that Russia will be happy with that, and so. And of course, I know it's also controversial even within EU member states, because not everybody is in fact wild about the idea, because it'll involve substantial transfer payments, it'll involve competition and all that sort of thing, and so it's but the prospect is one that for the European security order, which has been totally flipped on its head by the Russian invasions, sort of for this space, European space, to be stable and it will require institutionalizing Ukraine in a way that the EU will, the accession process will advance, but without the real anchor that would be addressed by a security arrangement.
And last but not least, Rusif, who are the old and new players in the Caucasus?
Yes. Forgive me in advance if I exceed the time on the screen, but this is a very interesting question, and as I said earlier in my statement, that for decades, the geopolitical options in South Caucasus were usually based on this dichotomy versus West versus Russia. Nowadays, fortunately or unfortunately, the number of stakeholders and actors in our part of the region has increased. There is Turkey, there is Iran, India even, Israel. And let's also not forget that while South Caucasus can be considered somehow as an extension of wider Europe, it is also a gateway to Central Asia. And probably the Indian colleagues can recall this very term, Great Game, which was coined in the middle of the 19th century, and which referred to the geopolitical competition of the British and Russian empires over Central Asia. And now, if we consider South Caucasus as part of this bigger geopolitical mosaic, then we can say that we are now facing a Great Game 2.0, in which we have more than two actors now. I forgot to also to mention China and Pakistan. So we have an interesting bunch of stakeholders, which definitely makes make the life of both regional countries very difficult, and both the traditional actors such as Russia or the EU or the United States, because right now they receive more challenges with this collapsing global order.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, our time is up. So we tried to give to the audience an overview of how these countries in these regions are navigating in this new world order. And I know that this 1 hour is not enough for this huge topic, but we tried our best, and we hope that you also get some useful and interesting information from these regions and also the new world order as well. So thank you very much. Thank you very much for staying with us. And as far as I know, now we have like a short break. And after that, let's continue these interesting discussions over dinner. Thank you.
Thank you very much to our distinguished panelists. Dinner will begin downstairs at 8 o'clock at the restaurant with Joseph Barniak, the Four Seasons leading bar pianist, providing live piano music. For those of you participating in the invite-only conversations over dinner, those will take place on this floor, which can be accessed by going out of these doors and turning right. Be sure to arrive on time, as seating is limited and will be done on a first-come, first-served basis. After dinner, please join us for a very special free-flowing fireside chat titled Valuing Values, What Can Unify Our Societies. This will examine the role values